Maybe you're hearing this word being thrown around already today, perennial. What does that word mean? Especially if you're used to hearing that in the context of plants. But perennial is also this word that's been used to describe the through line among our various spiritual and religious traditions, that maybe there is sort of this golden thread that ties them together. Maybe, and maybe this is something that you felt at various stages in your life, perhaps the various religious and spiritual traditions of the world are speaking to a deeper, more fundamental truth about what it means to be a human, what it means to be a spiritual being, and maybe they are simply doing it from their own cultures and from their own contexts. And so that's what we've been exploring through the past couple of weeks, really asking the question, how do we approach life in such a way that we can integrate the diversity of religious and spiritual traditions in our world? And so the first week, we talked about various faiths, various religions as containers. And it's really about what they hold that is of the most importance. So Rumi had this great line. He said, "The lamps are different, the light is the same." And may we hunger for the light, and may we not get so caught up on the differences between the lamps and letting that be the be-all, end-all. The next week, we talked about this journey from dogma into dharma, and we described it as beginning for a lot of us in a place where perhaps there was a type of religious experience that was built on fear. And it was being told what you can and cannot believe. And maybe you moved into a spirituality that felt authentic to you, trusting your own compass, not built on fear, but built on love. Right? And so that's the journey that we explored a few weeks ago. And then last week, we talked about the mystics, these great teachers and poets from really all across the various traditions of the world, who all seem to speak to a similar truth, a truth of our deep belonging, that the spiritual reality at the core is not something that's far away from us, not something that we need a guru or we need the right understanding to access, but it's actually just waiting for us in this moment, right? And in your own subjective personal experience. And so we took a lot of inspiration and comfort from their words and their perennial wisdom. So as we close today, and as we usually do anytime we end a Sunday message or end a series, the encouragement is to go out into the world and to embody these ideas, these truths, not just something that we can get into this room and just talk about interesting philosophies, but actually, what does it mean to embody it, to live it, right? Otherwise, it's just words. But really what we've been talking about is that we all have the ability to navigate this world, right? We all have this compass that we can trust to navigate and find our way through, even though there's so many voices vying for our attention. And so as we close today, and as we kind of send each other off on this beautiful journey of life, don't worry, Aldea's not going anywhere. I'm just saying metaphorically, we just, anyway. But as we do that, I want to kind of send you off with this series with a bit of a one final word on what to look out for. I almost kind of see myself like I'm the park ranger, and I'm like, hey, go on this hike, but just want to let you know, there's, might be some snakes, maybe a bear, poison ivy. Just want to let you know, but don't be afraid. It's like I'm here to prepare you, not scare you, So just know what to be aware of on this journey. I want to just bring some awareness as we close this week, and I want to bring some awareness on the fact that despite all the spiritual growth we can go through and all the expanded consciousness we can experience, all the ways that we can dig into this perennial wisdom, there is always this possibility that all of our spiritual ideas and all the things we do can also become a bit of an ego boost. That they can also feed our sense of certainty rather than making us more comfortable with uncertainty. And even the dogmas that we leave behind, we move into a new, more expanded way of seeing things, and even those ways can sometimes become a dogma of their own. So I just want to leave us with some words on being aware and kind of looking out for those tendencies. If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe ask yourself if you've ever had a thought like this. You ever thought this, like, it really is all about love. And I can't believe there are some idiots out there that do not understand that. We've all thought it, right? I think as communities we could do to be a little more honest with some of these things, right? With some of the pitfalls of spirituality, with some of the ways we get stuck and the traps we fall into. I think there is such a deep sense of healing. We can be real with each other. Maybe a type of authenticity that you haven't experienced in a faith community before. But I think when we can be truly honest in that way, there's this deep exhale that we take and we go, we're all human. We all experience it, and it's totally okay. It's totally normal. Let's talk about it. And so today's message as we close is called Enlightenment and Ego. Because the first week of this series, we talked about how the perennial philosophy actually there's a bit of an arc, there's a movement. And part of it is that we acknowledge that there is a spiritual reality that we all belong to. But sometimes in the play of life and in the illusion of the material world, we lose connection to who we truly are, right? And so part of the perennial wisdom and perhaps what the various religions are inviting us to is actually just a deep recognition of our own belonging, of our own belovedness. And so this awareness, one of the ways that we can describe this awareness, one of the words that's very popular and used in this context, particularly in the East, is this word enlightenment. And I like this word because I like to break it down and think of it as just to bring light to fill with light. And so maybe you could think of enlightenment as just bringing that awareness to something and really turning the lights on in that recognition of the spiritual reality of life. But what's interesting, there's a paradox here. And it's very subtle, and yet I think it's significant enough that we should talk about it. And it's this paradox where enlightenment itself can become a trap of ego. There was a mystic named Anthony de Mello who said this: the ego wants to own even enlightenment. Some of you resonate with that. Some of you might be a little puzzled by this. And it's a tricky one. And don't worry, we're going to really spend the rest of today unpacking this idea. But I think part of what's being communicated here is that there is an aspect of human nature which is to take even our best of intentions and maybe unknowingly for those intentions to become a bit distorted. So we come to spirituality for a deep sense of connection. And yet what's interesting is sometimes spirituality can actually end up separating us, leading us to feel separate because we're like, look how good I am at spirituality, right? And you end up feeling separate from others. We have our ideas of oneness, right? We're all one. And you might feel like, I'm really good at oneness, right? I don't know about them, right? Our metaphysical ideas, they're all good and fine, but when they become defenses against uncertainty, maybe they've become a tool and a trap of ego. So I want to define ego today because it's a word that gets thrown around a lot. Maybe we've heard it in all kinds of different contexts. The Greek root of the word simply means I, so a sense of I. And Freud, who popularized this word in our modern context, that's also what he was really talking about, right? Because we think of ego in terms of like an arrogant person or a jerk. This person has a lot of ego, but really, ego is just used to describe a sense of self and how we organize our thoughts around a sense of self. So when ego is brought up in spirituality, often really what it's just talking about is this idea, this concept that you and I are this separate self disconnected from reality in that way. Like we are a separate individual. And that's just part of what it means to be human. Michael Singer, who wrote the Untethered Soul series, said, the ego is the mental construct that constantly tries to protect, defend, and build a version of me. What the heck? That was weird. It was an iPad issues, everybody. Okay. Man, I was such on a roll, and then that just kind of like killed it for a bit. So let me find my way back. You're supposed to, you can laugh at me. It's okay. Insane. The problem with ego is this. That was my ego. My ego was like, you screwed up so bad. It was trying to protect. It was like, where is your sense of self going? The problem is that we are born from this deep experience of oneness, right? We come out of the mother's womb, and really the womb is like this oceanic sense of unity. We don't have any differentiation in the sense that we are separate, but that starts to come in through our development as human beings, right? So from 6 to 18 months, we start to get this general sense of an I, like a separate I, maybe from 2 to 5 years, we start to develop more of our preferences, maybe even this capacity to compare ourselves to other human beings. Then ages 6 to 8, we really have more of a solidified story of the separate self. Now, I want to honor these stages because I think so often we speak so negatively of ego, but the reality is that these are important components of our human development. Part of becoming an adult, part of moving through life is just going through that individuation process, right? So we don't look at this negatively. We don't look at a child recognizing that it is separate on some level as a problem. The problem comes in is that as we grow, as we evolve, as we become adults and beyond, we get so caught up in that separate sense of self that it starts to rule everything, right? So we become really over-identified with things like my wealth or my stuff or my achievements, right? My body, my knowledge, and even my spirituality, right? It all becomes things that we identify with as part of this separate story of who I am. Now, I think it's so important that we don't judge ourselves in these moments. We recognize that it's part of the human experience. It's something we all do, right? So there's no reason to judge. But it is good to recognize that when we're getting really caught up in that story, we are losing touch with that perennial wisdom and that perennial connectedness. Now, despite what some book titles might tell you, I don't think that ego is the enemy. I don't think that ego is something to be completely eradicated, because really, if we had no ego whatsoever, we wouldn't really have any motivation to do anything at all. So our desire to live a full, meaningful life, to maybe have a family or bring meaning into the world, that is also a product of our ego on some level, right? I know for me, like, I want to live, I want to laugh, I want to love, I want to live, laugh, love. And ego on some level is what brings that motivation. The problem is if we see it on a spectrum, right? We see like ego on one side and we see enlightenment on the other. We get so over-identified on the ego side that we lose connection to the mystery, right? Or we become insulated from our unity and interconnectedness with each other, with the planet, with the divine. This is because the ego is so good at hijacking and co-opting even our best intentions, right? We've all experienced some version of having good intentions hijacked. Like, have you ever been in an experience where like a coworker stole an idea from you and claimed it as their own? Has that ever happened to anyone? Last service, people were like, everyone had that experience. They were like, laugh. And then someone was laughing, like, I was like, it's too evil of a laugh. Like, you were the person that did it. It sounds like no one here has had that experience, so I'm grateful I have not, and I think it just sounds like something that would make me so mad. Maybe you've had more of this experience, at least I had, where you're in a group project and then someone kind of co-ops the whole thing, hijacks it, and then they take over, right? But we've had experiences where a good idea can get taken away, right? It can get taken and used for some other purpose. And so this is what ego is really good at doing with even our greatest ideas, even like the idea of being on a spiritual path. Ego's like, you want to be spiritual? We are going to be the best at being spiritual. You want to be humble? No one is going to be more humble than us. You want to get rid of the ego? Yeah, you could totally do that. No one's going to have less ego than us, man. Right? We all know that we can engage in some version of this. And I know for me, like, spirituality itself, the idea of myself as a spiritual person can totally be an ego trip. It's something that I turn to. If I'm ever feeling insecure about myself, all I got to do, just throw on another bead, you know? I'm going to a party, and I know there's going to be a lot of really spiritual people there. I'm like, all right, just got to add one more. Feeling a little anxious today, right? And if I run out of necklaces, I just have all these wonderful bracelets, you know what I mean? And just kind of, and look, now I'm totally secure. The thing is the ego is so good at sneaking into all of these different places, right? It sneaks in like you might, I'm like a professional at sneaking candy into a movie theater. Anyone else good at this? Right? Like I have it on my resume. But ego is really good at sneaking itself into places that you wouldn't expect. There's a great teacher named Adyashanti who once said this: as long as you are trying to become enlightened, you are reinforcing the one who wants to become enlightened. In other words, the ego, right? As long as you're trying to become enlightened, the ego is like, look at us, look at what we're doing. And he closes with this. He says, the greatest trap on the spiritual path is to believe that you have arrived. There's a phrase that you may or may not be familiar with, but this phrase is spiritual materialism. We're probably all familiar with this more traditional idea of materialism, right? Like maybe being overly focused on material things. And maybe if we look at really the heart of it, maybe materialism is more about using stuff to try to fill this feeling of a lack, right? Like there's no, we're feeling insecure, we're feeling out of control, and maybe stuff becomes one of the ways that we sort of moderate our feelings. And look, we live in the West, we live in the modern world. I think all of us are guilty on some level of doing this. I know I am for sure. Have you ever heard of the website Poshmark, anyone? Okay, well, if you don't know, you can buy used clothes on Poshmark, and it's become like a guilty pleasure of mine because I just love a good deal. And there's nothing like a good deal to make me feel good about myself already, like, oh, you're thrifty. But then on top of it, one of the traps of materialism, it kind of tells you like, oh, you just need that one more thing and you're going to be complete. And often I'm like, I just need that pair of pants. And I know that my life's going to really kind of take a turn right here. That's all I need, right? So I've noticed that I tend to use Poshmark when I'm feeling insecure, when I'm feeling anxious, when I'm feeling like I need a little more control. I just go there and I feel a lot better. Which means that if you've ever been one of those kind people that has complimented an outfit of mine, just know it was created from anxiety, right? But just as that is a form of materialism that we might engage in, the reality is that there is also a spiritual materialism that we engage in, because when our ideas or our practices or the spiritual experiences we collect, they just become something to fill a void. And the irony is that instead of being there to free us, which is really their purpose, they end up just becoming another trophy on our wall. Right? Like, have you ever met someone who's been to like 27 retreats, 10 of them were silent retreats, and they're still kind of a jerk, right? It's like, at a certain point, we can just collect experiences, we can collect ideas without actually being transformed by them. If we're just trying to fill a void, then we're missing the fact that the perennial wisdom was actually a reminder that you never had a lack to begin with. You've always been whole. You've always been complete. When we fall into the illusion that we are separate and disconnected, then certainly we feel a lack. And so what do? We try to fill that lack with all kinds of effort and striving, like who can I be? What can I add to my list of accomplishments? And then the very thing that was meant to free us, a spiritual path, ends up just becoming another cage. Like, how many of us know that we can leave behind a dogma? We can leave behind a set of rigid ideas and move into a more open-minded way of looking at things, and then that become another dogma. Because if it's built on certainty, and this is the only way, right? The ego can always co-opt things and turn it into another dogma, right? No matter how advanced or enlightened our ideas we might think they are, right? If we say this is the only way, if this is the only possible way, then it's just become another dogma, right? You might be an amazing meditator, but if you being such a good meditator makes you superior to everyone else, then it's just become another dogma, and it fulfills that lack created by spiritual materialism. So what I hope to do here, what I hope this place is, and I really love about Aldea, is that we can honor and celebrate our diversity and the difference of our beliefs and how we all come with different spiritual ideas, but we also recognize that any of those ideas can just become another dogma. So we place love at the center, right? We say love, period, which really is one way of saying that love is our highest value here. Love is a commitment, right? We are committed to love. All those other things, our beliefs or ideas, those are a conversation, right? Those are worth curiosity, but love is our commitment. See, what can happen, friends, is that even our most spiritually evolved ideas and the most progressive and open-minded versions of ourselves, we can still use those things to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves, to feel in control. In other words, all of it can be used to stabilize the ego instead of expanding and opening our hearts. Alan Watts put it this way when he talked about the security we so often desire. He said there's a contradiction in wanting to be perfectly secure in a universe whose very nature is momentariness and fluidity. If I want to be secure, I'm wanting to be separate from life. It's an interesting thought, because I think really what it invites us to question is my spiritual path, is it defending me against the unknown, or is it making me more open to the unknown, right? Is my spiritual path making me feel more in control, or is it making me feel connection with others? Friends, there's nothing wrong with wanting some stability and security in this world that feels so chaotic, right? It feels like it's nice to have just a sense of groundedness. But I think it's important for us to ask, how much are we seeking security and stability to the point that we aren't actually engaging with life, right? That all of our spirituality has just become another check mark. I think of this as kind of a good news and bad news situation. The bad news being is that maybe all of our striving and trying to earn our way through life wasn't even the point, right? And that can be hard for us because some of us have spent a lot of our life trying to strive and earn. I know I have. But the good news is that if we can just let go of all that, right, we can stop taking ourselves so seriously, we can find that truth that the mystics were inviting us to, which was that it's actually all right here. You don't need to earn it. You don't need to be the best. You don't need to try to set yourself apart, right? You have it because it already belongs to you. I want to just try something. Maybe if you'd be willing to try it with me. I want you just to take a second and check within yourself. Maybe check your own body. Is there a part of you that still feels like it's holding on to this idea that you need to earn, that you need to strive, right? That if only you could do more, if only you could be better, then you would be worthy, then you would belong. Do you feel that anywhere? I know sometimes for me, I can stand up on this stage so often and feel like I need to be something for everyone, like I need to earn my way, and if I can do the best job, then I'm worthy, and it shows up in my body as a tension, right? So I don't know if maybe for you can feel those places still for you, and I encourage you, if you can feel it showing up as a physical sensation somewhere, I encourage you just to invite that part of you to relax and see what that feels like. Because if we can do that, from that place, I think we would stop taking ourselves so seriously. And we could start to laugh at ourselves. We could laugh at all of our striving. Friends, I don't believe that the point is to get rid of the ego entirely, but maybe we can dethrone it with bringing a sense of lightness and joy into this process, right? So when we notice that the ego is showing up, we don't need to attack ourselves and judge ourselves, but maybe we can return to that place of spaciousness, recognizing, look at how hard I'm trying. Look at how much I think I have to earn my worth, and I can let go of that pressure and that need. The next time you catch yourself judging yourself or judging another, the next time you see yourself holding really tightly on a certain idea or metaphysical concept, the next time you catch yourself striving, right, trying to fulfill the lack of spiritual materialism, maybe you can just kind of laugh at yourself. You can be like, wow, look at my ego. Look at how hard it really wants to define itself, how hard it really wants to be someone. Look at how hard it's working. And you could just have a lightness and a laughter and a compassion. I think there's a humility that comes with this approach. Last year, we did a series where we kind of broke down the meaning of different words, and humility was one of them. And we found that the root word for humility essentially just means close to the earth. So there is a perennial wisdom about remaining grounded, about remaining authentic and real. Friends, I think we're here to be human, right? To stay human, to become more human. I don't think that this perennial philosophy is about becoming disembodied and letting go of our humanness, but actually celebrating it. And one of the greatest ways that we can find our way back to our own humanity is by laughing at ourselves and bringing ourselves back to the ground with that sacred laughter. So I want to try something today in the service of some sacred laughter. A couple years ago when ChatGPT first kind of came on the scene, a lot of people there wasn't many uses for it at the time, and so a lot of people were using it for fun things, and one of the silly things that people would do was they were using ChatGPT to roast themselves. If you don't know what a roast is when people, you have comedians make fun of you. So if you've ever seen like a roast on TV, well, people were saying, hey, can ChatGPT roast me? And I think that this is actually a real interesting thing, because if you ask like a friend to roast you, or you ask your spouse to roast you, that could cause some real destruction in a relationship. So I think there's something wise about asking a computer to roast you. It's more impartial, right? So in the service of this sacred groundedness that comes from being able to not take ourselves so seriously, to look at the ego, to laugh at the ego, I've decided to do something never before done, I think, at any church ever, and I will read to you ChatGPT's roast of me. Now, a couple things. You are allowed to laugh. You're allowed to laugh. It's okay. This is not a test. And also, if this goes terribly, if this goes up in flames, just know, hey, we were trying something new. We're making history. I don't think any other church, there's no other place this Sunday that the pastor is standing up and self-roasting. So just let's give some points for that. All right, here we go. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Jake asked me to roast him, which is ironic because he probably spent 20 minutes trying to make sure the roast was emotionally safe, spiritually healthy, and consistent with the perennial philosophy. He tells everyone to live in the present moment while simultaneously planning next year's sermon series, his next book, 3 workshops, a podcast, a retreat, and wondering if the font on slide 12 communicates mystical or just hipster. Jake says spirituality isn't about collecting ideas. Then he buys another book because this one explains non-duality from a slightly different angle. I've noticed Jake has a remarkable gift. He can turn almost anything into a sermon. A movie trailer, a cup of coffee, a parking ticket. If a squirrel made eye contact with him for more than 3 seconds, next Sunday's message will be called The Sacred Acorn. He encourages everyone to let go of control, yet I've watched him tweak stage lighting with the concentration of someone trying to align the chakras of the universe. That one's very true, actually. He says we shouldn't seek external validation, but if one person says, that message really spoke to me, he'll pretend to be humble while mentally replaying that compliment for the next 6 business days. That may or may not be true, cannot confirm. And perhaps my favorite contradiction, Jake is always telling people they're already enough, while quietly wondering if he should also learn Greek, Hebrew, filmmaking, jazz piano, quantum physics, and underwater basket weaving, just in case that's what finally makes him enough. For someone who talks so much about transcending the self, Jake spends an astonishing amount of time trying to become the best version of someone who doesn't exist. And honestly, if he ever completely got rid of his ego, he'd probably write a 6-week series about it. Thank you, ChatGPT. What I find here is that I think there is this deep perennial truth that there actually is nothing to defend, right? That we don't need to hold on to these ideas of ourselves and fight so hard to try to protect ourselves, that we can actually laugh at ourselves. And it reminds us that there's nothing to defend because there's really nothing in threat of actually being taken away, right? We don't need to work so hard thinking that one day we're going to arrive, because the mystics, the perennial philosophy has reminded us that we're actually already here. There's nowhere to get to, right? There's no guru that's going to give you the answer because the answers are already inside of you, right? You don't need more beads because the beads are already, they're wrapped around your heart, so to speak. Yeah, I know. I was like, someone was like, I hope he was going to give these away. Like I'm going to throw these out. I'm like, no, these are coming home with me. Enlightenment is so fascinating to me. It's almost like this really amazing trick because we get convinced that there's this place to go, this place to get to, right? Like if only I can achieve, fulfillment and enlightenment. And in reality, I think it's actually a reminder that it's always been right here, right now, right? Maybe that's the best way to sum up the perennial philosophy. Maybe we don't need to get any more complicated than be here now. And so I just want to invite us as we close this series, if you feel comfortable, close our eyes, find a deepness to our breath, find a comfortable position. And I want to invite you to return to that practice we did before, that you could locate anywhere in your body that still is striving, still is trying to earn, still is trying to be the best, that still feels like it's not enough. And can we relax even more? Can we release that tension even more? And as we release that tension, we can also release the idea of a finish line. We can also release the idea of perfection. We can also release the idea of trying to be someone. We can release the idea of certainty. We can let go of any unworthiness, for you are worthy. And as you release all of that, notice all the space that it's freed up within you. Space for so much love, so much compassion. Maybe space for some sacred laughter. Perhaps we just take a moment and turn our attention to the ego, who is always with us, a companion. And though so often our impulse is to look at ego with judgment and even violence, maybe in this moment we can try being grateful. Thank you, ego, for keeping me alive. Thank you, ego, for bringing motivation. And I have my eye on you, ego. You can be a trickster. And I remember that the freedom and connection that I desire is not found in my best attempts at defining myself or winning spirituality or winning religion. But in fact, it's in the recognition that there was actually nothing ever to win. There's no test, because it's always belonged to me. It's always been right here. The invitation has always been to come back to this moment, right, without any need to fix, to earn, to strive. And so whatever you might have felt this morning, as a release of that tension, as an awareness of your inherited worthiness, your inherent belonging, and you could just find that and remember that it's always with you. Right? And even as we move through our days and we are challenged and we struggle, that this is no further than a breath away, a moment of mindfulness away. So we know that it's always here, it's always available. The perennial wisdom is not some far off, complicated, hard to discern secret, but it's actually the recognition of what always has been, what's always right here. When you feel ready with your final breath, you can gently come back and open your eyes. And I just thank you so much for joining us today, for being here, for closing out this series with us.